No, not at all. All right. Another round of applause for that incredible film. Yes. It is now my pleasure to introduce our panel entitled Uncovering Stories Lost to History. This panel will explore who decides who gets to make history and how are those stories captured, cataloged, and passed down through generations. How can we do better to preserve those often overlooked or forgotten figures? Moderating this panel will be Umbreen Bhatti, the Constance Hess Williams 66 Director of the Athena Center. And Umbreen will be joined by a wonderful group of folks. We have Jane Applegate, writer, producer, and co-creator of Remarkable Women, Out of the Shadows, a global documentary series in production. We also have Eve M. Kahn, an author and independent scholar who was the weekly antiquities columnist for the New York Times. You guys can come on up as grab your seats. For the New York Times from 2008 to 2016, we have Pam Aguilar, who's Senior Vice President, Head of Smithsonian Channel Content at MTV Entertainment Studios Paramount. And we have Dr. Lisa Coleman, inaugural Senior Vice President at NYU for Global Inclusion and Strategic Innovation. And so, Umbreen, with that, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm having a lot of feelings right now. So we had like 10 seconds to process them together on the floor, and we're going to do the rest of that right here, right now. So thank you, everyone who's able to stick around for this. This is like a hot topic, and it's a topic that our students really care about. So it's really, really fun to have this conversation here. So we have a combination of storytellers on this stage, people who make decisions about what stories get told to some degree, those of us who work in universities. And so I think it's going to be a really great chat. And I also want to make sure we save enough time for questions. So do know that there will be a chance for that as well. So I think I'll start with maybe Pamela, Jane, and Eve. As storytellers, where do you find the stories you want to tell? Like, where are you looking? It should already be on. Is it on?
They find me. Isn't that the case with so many of us? Right? I stumble upon a name on a painting, and then I happen to call somebody who happens to know something about that artist, and there happens to be a box full of letters, thousands of pages of letters of a 19th century painter. That resulted in my first book, 2019. And then I happened to see a magazine published from 1909 to 1914 by a woman named Zoe Anderson Norris. And I happened to Google and realize there's no decent scholarship about her. And that's resulted in my current book project. I'm assuming all the other panelists have that same thing, where they find somebody, there's no good scholarship, and then it's like you get grabbed by the throat and you can't let go, kind of like Philippa.
Well, the first thing I want to say is we're adding this story to our list of more than 100 remarkable women that we're profiling in our project. And it's an incredible story. And our whole project started because I went to France a couple years ago to write and produce a film about the women behind the success of James Joyce, and found out there were 6 women that without their support in every way, we never would have heard of the book Ulysses. And that kind of opened the door to the thought of women behind famous men, and then women who just had no story to be told, but had a remarkable story. So I'm working with a team of journalists and producers all around the world. Actually, thanks to Melissa Silverstein and her contacts, we've met filmmakers everywhere. And I do want to acknowledge my executive producer who's here, Alice Look, who is a former producer for History Channel, who's been trying to sell this project for 15 years. And now we're hoping that the 16th year will be the year that we can get these stories out.
Yeah, and for me, I'd add that in the capacity where I sit at, sort of heading the Smithsonian Channel and content, it's really about meeting people, finding producers, but same thing, producers come to me, filmmakers come to me, but oftentimes it's also reading something in the paper and then trying to find out if there's someone out there telling that story. If not, really digging in and us doing research and then finding someone that would be the best person to tell that story.
Yeah, I hear that countless times. Like, I looked and they didn't have a Wikipedia page. I kept digging and I couldn't find very much in the library, and I think it turns into a lot. there. So you mentioned 15 years, and I would love to talk a little bit, like describe some of the challenges that you faced from the path of uncovering all the way to actually getting them told. Like where have you found champions and support? And that's, yeah, to Jane. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I've been telling stories all my life as a journalist and a producer, and I had never really been that interested in women in history. But basically, all through COVID and during the isolation, I just kept posting notices on international women's filmmaker pages and through organizations saying, do you have a story that needs to be told? Is there a woman or 10 women in your country that you feel should be out of the shadows? So we've just started collecting and amassing this incredible list of women that, of course, can go on, long after I'm gone from the planet. And we kind of feel like this is a legacy project. And also knowing how difficult it is to commercially sell a series. I'm very happy to be sitting next to you because you'll be hearing from us. But the idea is if we have a parallel course to develop educational videos about women in history for tweens, high schoolers, and university students. So the stories will be told. They're just coming from all over, and we are assembling a pretty great team of people ready to tell them. So it's just taking that journalistic curiosity, and every single story, Alice writes our blog, and every story that we post on remarkablewomenseries.com reads like a film script. They have to have drama, they have to have challenges, and they have to be entertaining. That's kind of the high bar that we've set.
And who's been a champion for you?
Well, who's been a champion? That's a really good question. We have a board of advisors, and I think you're the first people to hear that we finally got our nonprofit corporate status so we can start applying for grants and raising the profile of the project. So our board members are incredible. They're a global group of women. Many women from the business community. I used to be a Bloomberg business reporter, so I've kind of gone back and tapped all the people that supported my work as a small business reporter. And now we're just launching on International Women's Day. We're having a big party that's sponsored by a lot of corporations that seem to be tapping in and very interested in connecting with women and using women that we're discovering as a role model for young women. And I've been writing editorials, and we're just kind of getting up on a soapbox, so attracting some really wonderful support.
Yeah, and I ask because I feel like in this work, one of the most powerful things you can see is how important just a single champion can be, or a couple of, like you need that. It can't happen even if, it can't happen with just you pitching and pitching. And so, Eve, talk to us a little bit about what it's been like in a newsroom. I mean, what have you been pitching? So you spent some time at the New York Times, and covered a lot of issues there. And so how have you pitched the stories that you think needed to be told, and what are some of the responses that you've gotten?
So I took over the Antiques column in 2008. It had run steadily since 1966, every Friday. And I decided to focus on as many underappreciated makers of material culture as I could find. And and I found smart people in every imaginable field, working with every imaginable underappreciated group. Black ceramists before the Civil War in South Carolina, and 19th century women painters who hiked in the White Mountains to paint in heavy skirts or kayaked along the coast of Florida. I found I had only ever women editors. I never had an idea related to some underappreciated group turned down. But every column I wrote, there was always I tried to get the maddening level of detail down to every time they mention a male artist, for example, and they explain, he was married twice, whatever, they leave the wives' names out. Just basic stuff saying, he was widowered young, his wives' names were, right? There's just the level of detail that I tried to focus on to level the playing field.
And you never know, right, when that detail is something that catches someone else's attention, right? And then they follow that thread. So Pam, this is either an enviable task or an unenviable task, but it sounds like you get to make some decisions about what gets told. So walk us through that. Like, what's your process like?
I think that for me, certainly there are strategies, right? And the business of doing this. But at the end of the day, I find it a great responsibility as a woman and a woman of color to be in this position. There aren't a lot of us in the type of role that I sit in. And so by the nature of every single one of us bringing what we bring to the table and to an experience, I bring myself to the decision-making process. And so it's asking questions. Is there enough representation in this film? Has the story been told from this perspective? Are women represented? Are women's voices represented? Are people of color? It's really a matter of coming to it in a more holistic kind of way for me. And I think it works because there's projects where it's a yes or no, flat out, because no matter how passionate I may feel about it, it just doesn't match the mandate that we have. But beyond that, there are, as soon as I'm in the guardrails, it's fair game. I feel like I've been given this responsibility, and so I take that very seriously. And so with my team, we discuss all the issues that come to the table with a project, and then make the decision whether or not to move forward.
Thank you. And from your perch, do you know much about audience appetite? What your audiences are wanting to see?
To an extent, yes. We have certain demographics that we're looking to target, and we do a lot of research on every project. We'll do research to see if this specific project is going to hit certain metrics. But it's really about being engaged and involved and reading and being curious. And so staying with that beat and that pulse of what's in the zeitgeist. And that's also very important. And it's almost like there's a feeling. It's funny because with Philippa, don't show your feelings. And for me, it's a constant sometimes, okay, these are my personal feelings, and this, because sometimes you can't really divide it and split it up, and you go with your gut. But yeah, there are various metrics that are followed, but beyond that, it's about staying curious and knowing what people want and talking to people and meeting people and getting that sense of what is real versus what's just coming through on, your email that are just numbers and
Yeah,
data.
I mean, what is it other than a feeling, right? I mean, that part just wrecked me, just watching that and thinking, oh, okay, so there's a cold, hard way to do it, and I don't know, intuition tells you something, right? People talk about news judgment and, instincts and all of this stuff and knowing what's going to work, and so the idea that because they expressed it, therefore it can't be real because it's so intense. I mean, the obsessions, I think, are what lead us to some of the best stories that we see. So, Lisa, can we talk about the university?
Yes.
That's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to ask you to talk about the university now, because I am a little bit oh my God.
There's a lot there, isn't there?
Yeah,
There's a
so
lot there.
reactions to watching that?
So first let's just start where you just started, this idea of subjectivity and objectivity, right? And we know that in the academy, sometimes we try to be the arbiters of knowledge, and in that sense, then defining what's object and what's subject. And I think in those ways, this film really teases out and tries to get us to ask the question of whose subject and whose objective knowledge, and who gets to own knowledge, who gets to produce it. And it's interesting, I was looking at before I came here, and there's a clip that says, her story makes his story, right? Her story makes his story. And in this film, that's very clear, even though her story tries to get erased. And so I think in terms of the universities, we have troubling histories in our universities, right? Who gets included, who gets excluded, how we think knowledge gets produced. And I was thinking also of this idea of remains, right? And the ownership of remains. So many universities own remains, right? And we've seen a lot of universities recently struggle with their history to uncover those remains and then to think about what that means in terms of repatriation of those remains. And so I just think this film raises all of those questions. And as we were coming onto stage, it means I have a lot more work to do. I think we all do within the university structures of how we then help to bring stories to light. And so I'll end my comments here is that one of my roles is to bring stories to light. That's what I do. And through programs, through featuring people like who are on this stage. And so I think as we reimagine what those stories look like, I'd like to go back to some of the comments that were said already, is how do we make sure and ensure that, that the subject, it still remains central to the narrativization, and that the subject and who pushes, and whether it's a single champion. And what I like about this story is it's not a single champion. She uses collaboration in ways that others didn't to actually get to where she goes. And so how do we put that subjectivity back into these narratives? And so I think we have to reimagine how the university produces, thinks about knowledge, and goes back to these earlier points of who gets excluded and included.
You know, she does use collaboration, right? But this reminds me of questions I get asked by students from time to time, which is like, they would love to collaborate, but then something can happen. Like
And
what
then it's
happened to
taken
Philip,
away.
right? And so how do you kind of keep your own part of the story there? Like, I don't have a clear answer for students, right? I mean, the best answer I can give them is find great collaborators, but that's a very real concern.
And make sure that your intellectual property is copyrighted, patented, or whatever those things are that you need to do.
Yes.
Right? Yes? Because that, I mean, that's it.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
You have to do that.
You have to, and you have to be your own advocate. I mean, I think we're speaking to a choir here, but you have to be your own advocate. I talk to young female women filmmakers, and it's the same thing. It's and Charlotte, who's here, knows. I mean, it's because I started out as a filmmaker, and it's that constant push and fight for your voice to be the producer, to be the director, and not the perpetual production assistant or the perpetual associate producer who's really doing the work. I interviewed for a very highly regarded documentary filmmaker who is still very successful, and it was early in my career, but I was on that tipping point where I was ready to produce. And he said, the job description was very much a producer, but I was getting an AP credit. And he told me straight out, you can't have a producer credit on my project because I don't share my statues. And that was eye-opening. And now, in retrospect, I'm grateful for that message, even though it crushed me. But it made me fight. It made me look for the collaborators. It made me look for the people that would support me and help me, like Philippa, right? Do the thing that I was looking to do and achieve that.
There's a great sign in the film in the middle where she starts this search and it says, "Love crumbs." I don't know if you saw that on the wall. And I was thinking about the crumbs, right, that we put together in that idea of passion, right, that kinds of that we try to mute in certain sites. But that passion is actually what drove her. And quite frankly, I will say this, it's what drives most PhDs, right? We find something that we're obsessed with and we go for that thing. And somehow in the narrative of the objective story, that gets reduced. But that's actually what is happening. And I think that's, to underscore what you're saying, is exactly right. Follow those love crumbs, right? And make it clear that you're the one doing it.
I meet many women scholars who tell me that they're not ready to present yet on something, and I tell them, give as many progress reports as you can, be the author of the Wikipedia page that you wish to exist, because you need to stake out your territory, so that when someone comes along and gets interested, you can say, oh yeah, you know, that's mine already. And also I find my obsessions bring stuff out of the woodwork, and people are incredibly helpful. It's like with Philippa, she didn't stand to make a dime on that. But when you stand to make no money on a project, at least in my case, people help you for free. I meet descendants of people I'm researching who simply give me things because they tell me, you're the great steward of, my great-grandfather's photo, and, my nieces won't care, my stepsons won't care. So if you learn nothing else from me today, people will help you for free.
Yeah, that's really real. I mean, and when someone stands to make a dime, then a whole bunch of people will come in, right? But
I have a quick thought on
please do,
collaboration. One thing we're getting some interesting pushback on is that we've offered an opportunity for these independent filmmakers around the world to propose stories. And now as we're packaging and pitching, the networks and the people we're meeting with are saying, what promises have you made to these filmmakers? And I said, it's a global collaboration. We've made no promises. We're saying, put your idea in the pot. And if nothing else, you might be the production services company in Poland or the production team in Finland if these stories are chosen. But still, a year and a half later, no one has really dropped out of the project because they're like, we will do anything we can to help tell these stories. And it's just a different model that at the moment actually is making our lawyers a little crazy. And so they're like, chain of title and copyright, and who owns this? And I said, we own the premise. It's nothing you can't copyright an idea, which is really important to know, but you can protect the way you tell the story. And we're using a hybrid format with actors, archival footage experts, and just historians. So it's very multimedia, and it's totally flexible. So that's it's unique in that we're not going in and saying, this is the show we want to produce. We're saying, it's like being a baker. We have all the ingredients, and we're ready to get baking. We need, we just want to figure out, is it a muffin? An English muffin, a cake. I love the cake image in this. I mean, I have used cakes to get through to people as a reporter. It works, cakes and food.
So I want to go to audience questions in 1 second, but I do want to ask this because we've seen this so many times, right? Like you're obsessed, you're really into something, and then you have too many feelings, you need to step away, right? So what I do want to know is when someone does get paid for it, how do you make sure that's you? So Pamela, do you have a thought about that? Like at some point, these projects are going to turn into something where someone's benefiting financially, and how do you make sure that you're protected in that process?
Case in point, you have to have representation at this point, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have representation, that is when the negotiation goes down, and it has to be established, and at least in my perspective, from the jump, that this is your project, that this is the amount that the project is worth, that this is the budget, and this is what you are making. And please, for any filmmakers, anybody that's out there, make sure there's a line item for your salary on there. There's so many projects that people, it's like, how are you going to survive? And a production fee for your production, because it just has to be in writing from the very beginning. It should not be muddled. It shouldn't be at the end. And another thing is get paid and get credited. Make sure that your name is on the roll. That's important because that's currency for our industry.
Yeah, Eve, I so appreciated that about, like, the Google should come back to you. When you're out there talking about something, you just put it out there more and more so people start to associate you with that. So we have time for a couple of audience questions. Are there any? I see one back there and one over here. So let's start there and then we'll go there. Okay, so in the back row there and then in the back row there.
Thank you. I want to say you had a lot of very impressive points made that scratch the surface of something that I think a lot of young men and women, not just women, but particularly women, need to learn and understand if they are going to be, whether you're an artist, a writer, a screenwriter, want to be a filmmaker, a producer, that you need to learn and understand. And I'm very happy to hear talk about get representation, consult lawyers. I happen to be a lawyer, not an intellectual property one. But I know too many needlework designers, for example, who have a complete lack of understanding of copyright and how to protect their original designs. And I know artists that are the same way. I have artist clients who don't understand. And they don't consult lawyers because lawyers cost money. And I think is there any effort, are you aware of effort in a sort of institutional university setting in which the effort to teach those who want to create the importance, not just of the line item on the budget for your salary, but also to consult professionals, lawyers, PR reps, et cetera. How do you go about this? Is there any organized effort of anyone's aware of? And the last part of that is I have a classmate from Columbia who is a history professor, and he routinely teaches a class or has routinely taught a class on how to get published as a history writer, how to get articles published. Is there, it's that kind of basic knowledge that I know I scrambled to learn as a needlework designer. It's a side hustle that makes no money. But it's, is there any institutional? Sorry to carry on, but I really am impressed with what I'm hearing here. But I think there's another step that needs to go.
I actually teach negotiation. I teach negotiation and teach in our business school. I work at New York University, and we have a number of courses directed toward this at the intersection of thinking about production, business, and then other things like branding, et cetera, and the kinds of skills that you need to have. Part of that is because we have some interdisciplinary cross-school initiatives. I also know that the University of Southern California has some of this, although it's professors of practice that do some of this work. I will say that from my knowledge, it's burgeoning, right? This is a new area in terms of these intersectional pieces that you're talking about. But I will just say this, is one of the reasons I started teaching negotiation early on is that I found that people don't negotiate, particularly women do not negotiate well. They don't know what to negotiate, they don't know where to get the expertise, lawyers, thinking about patents, different levels of intellectual properties and what that means in terms of the legal consequences, et cetera. So at any rate, if I were to underscore anything, again, is to look for the experts, and some of the courses that are offered, I teach in the executive business courses. Those are not free, but there are some that are free, and someone like me offers pro bono courses online occasionally, et cetera. So I would look for those opportunities because I think they can be extremely helpful as you think about navigating exactly what you're talking about and some of our panelists have talked about.
Yeah, and I can speak a little bit to the Barnard context, which is that we do fewer of these kinds of programs, but what we do know is that whatever expert you need exists in the Barnard network. And so, like 100%, like of the 35,000 alums, of our extended network, et cetera. So what we do feel very comfortable saying to students and people who approach us is that if you are looking for something, we will help you find that person, and someone will help you at least even get started. So I can't necessarily guarantee like pro bono representation, but former lawyer, I'm sure I can find you someone who will talk to you for a little bit to help you figure out where to go from there. And so a huge part of what we're teaching students every day here is how you leverage resources around you and how you leverage like a very powerful sisterhood that we have. And so I 100% believe that whatever they need is within 1 to 3 degrees of separation at most, and we can find. And so that's the way we make those connections sort of as needed. So there was a question here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jude Wilson. I'm a Barnard grad, class of 1980. I know there's other alum here. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a former journalist with the Associated Press, CNN, and others. I just wanted to say that George Bernard Shaw said that the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And as a journalist, I think we all know that you can say something on TV, you can publish something, you can produce a film, but if nobody watches it or nobody pays attention to it, communication has not taken place. So I live in the state of Florida, And I would like to say that we don't need censorship in Florida because the films that I see here in New York when I come up are never even distributed in the state of Florida. Yesterday, we saw a film about Judy Blume. Judy Blume's books were just pulled from the public libraries and schools in my county, which is Brevard County. 2 weeks ago, we had a struggle because the governor backed the High School Athletic Association, which was requiring cisgender female students to supply their menstrual period dates as part of the condition of playing sports for their schools. Currently, there is an effort to reappoint all the trustees of the public universities of the state of Florida with political appointees who will then make the decisions about who gets tenured and other faculty positions, as well as administration positions. So my thought, my question to you all is, A, do you see in the future, can you envision perhaps a situation where we can get alternative distribution for the films that we see here at the Athena, films which privilege the female perspective and go outside of the male gaze? That's A, distribution. B, do you think that there is any way that we could collaborate with writers? I've been to a lot of, I was with Carmen Agradidi, who writes for an NPR person, but an author of children's books, whose books have just been pulled from. So what I'm wondering is, could we do something like banned books and films? Could we somehow collaborate across fields, creative fields, and can we please get some distribution or some exposure? Can we work together to collaborate to see that these films and these books and all of these things that we produce are seen elsewhere? Because frankly, in the New York, Washington, LA kind of consortium, I believe, living in Florida, that you have no idea how horrible it is out there and how difficult it is to get these works seen. So that's my question and a little comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I would say thank God for the internet, because unless the state of Florida is going to unplug everyone's Wi-Fi and their connections, that's one opportunity. And so we're starting with posting all our materials on our website and having people subscribe to a good old-fashioned monthly newsletter with links to read about these women. We're going very grassroots, but you're right. I mean, the opportunities to have mass market and have people watch things that are uncensored and controversial, it's really frightening, and also as a journalist, it's terrifying what's going on around the world. So I think, just knowing that as long as you can still get online, and there's some wonderful platforms. There's a company called Curiosity Stream, that's a spin-off of Discovery, that you've probably heard of, that's buying and acquiring content that maybe doesn't fit in other genres. So I think there's still hope to get these stories out, but we all have to, really look at the First Amendment and keep quoting that.
Well, the reason I emphasize live is because largely underserved populations in the state of Florida and West Virginia and other states where I have lived and worked, they don't have access. They don't have the laptop at home that their family can afford to pay for. So if they lose a book out of the library, it's gone.
I was going to say that we could use the practices that subversive populations have used historically, whether it's civil rights individuals. One of the things we're doing right now is collaborating with emerging generations, right, who have tactics that I don't have because they're younger and they understand things and how to move social information differently than I do. So I also wanted to encourage collaborations across generations, from Gen Z to the alphas, because the alphas are really subversive and really know how to do some things at 10 years old that I don't know how to do.
It's a terrifying moment as a parent, right?
It's terrifying. It's terrifying. I have no idea what's going on. And then I would go back to some of those just rogue tactics, right? Guerrilla girls, all of those tactics that people used, seeming 25 years ago, et cetera. And that's where I would think about collaborations, and then those collaborations. And then in that case, you can use some of the low-level smart technologies, right? The second piece I would say is we have to get out of I work globally, and we have to get out of our bubble in the US, because there are lots of oppressive regimes globally where we can learn from others about how they have rebutted and resisted those regimes, and that's what we're seeing here as well. So I think there's some of that learning that can take place as well.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Lorraine. And thank you for that. That's really helpful.
I'm always
Hi,
thinking about subversion.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Lorene Arbus, and I just want to tell the panel, first of all, and I will make it short, you're all fantastic. And I've sat in over the years a lot of panels, been on many. This is really one of the all-time great panels, distinguished by concrete, helpful, factual, original information, and not just talking all over the place. Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you. The point I wanted to, the question I wanted, it's the point I want to make. I usually ask this question of a group, but I don't want to take your time to do a hand count. The question I always ask is, who here knows what the largest minority in the world is? And the hands never go up. Maybe one person who's heard me speak raises their hand, but never do people know the answer. And if when I tell you, you say, I wish I had thought of that, I need to ask you to please think of it ongoing. The largest minority in the world are people with disability who, by and large, don't have a voice. And if you look at the stats, which I could give great detail on, but I won't do it, women with disability are exponentially more abused and silenced than any other faction, any other group. So keep that in mind. I didn't hear the word disability mentioned by anybody, and I just think it's very important when we're talking about minorities and those who need access, or you want to give, to whom you want to give access, the disability.
Yeah, that's a really important reminder, so thank you for that. So are we out of time? Am I getting a sign? I'm getting a sign. But I'm going to take a moderator's moment and say that thank God, not just for the internet, but also for the in-person spaces that we have, because that is actually where I think some of these magical collaborations happen, and some of just the connections between people that, I've missed it, and I think it really, really matters. So thank you all for being here.